Welcome to Dr. Creepin's Dungeon. Body horror is a genre of horror that focuses on the grotesque and disturbing transformations, deformities, and mutilations of the human body. It delves into the psychological fear and revulsion that arises when the human form is altered in unsettling and unnatural ways. In body horror, the human body itself becomes the source of terror, as it undergoes horrifying changes, often beyond the control of the individual, as we will see in tonight's two tales of terror. Now, as always, before we begin, a word of caution. Tonight's stories may contain strong language, as well as descriptions of violence and horrific imagery. If that sounds like your kind of thing, then let's begin.
Kalisa the Friend. Hello? Hey, I don't know if this thing's recording. I don't know how these damn computers work. Hey, damn kids and their damn internet. I think it's time I told someone this story. Well, it's a crazy story, one you people won't believe, but it's one I have to tell for my own sake. The more memories you have that you're the only one alive to remember, the lonelier you become. And this memory, well, it's a doozy. So I'm going to record me telling it here, put it on the worldwide internet web thing, and then maybe you can remember it with me, even if you don't believe it. Well, it takes place a long time ago, 1961 or 62, on a little island several miles off the coast of India. Now, this island is mostly wilderness, but in the middle of that wilderness is a little village called Agrippina, named after the patron saint of those that suffer from leprosy. Started on a blistering hot Wednesday morning on the porch of the medic house. Well, the villagers were getting restless. Dr. Geddes was late, as usual, and it wasn't often he had them huddled together so closely. I think it'd be a health concern if the inhabitants didn't all have leprosy already, but, well, what the hell did I know? I didn't have a medical degree, nor did I know a thing about medicine. I was ordered there some weeks ago by the English government as a means of their own idea of time served. Now, I knew it was an atypical punishment from the usual way they did things, but not much more than that. I could have either served the rest of a 15-year sentence for trying to move cocaine back to the US, in prison, or done 6 months working in an English-occupied Indian leper village and do whatever Corporal Burke, a US liaison, and the commanding officer there told me to do. I guess they thought I'd take the prison time. No, Corporal Burke instructed me to assist Dr. Geddes, the one medical professional on the island, with whatever he needed as a kind of pseudo-nurse, and I'd done my best with that ever since I'd arrived, giving shots, taking vitals, handing out meds, and so on. With the proper equipment and sanitary precautions, it's not as hard as it looks, and it's better than lockup. Take my word on that. He told the corporal to round up the villagers in front of the medic house, a small stone building in the center of the village, and await his announcements. He told me to wait outside and stall them, whatever that meant. I just sat on the porch, playing my cup and ball toy that I'd found in Geddes' office, and glanced up at them occasionally, only to find them staring back at me. Leper colonies in the early 60s didn't have television, or YouTube or TikTok. They had cup and ball. Very few of them spoke English, and none of them did particularly well. As we all waited there awkwardly, frying in the sun, all I could hear was them chattering with each other in their native tongue, punctuated every once in a while by the occasional coughing and jangling of the bells tied to their arms. The infected natives were all forced to wear bells, so they couldn't get too close to someone not infected, namely us, without making themselves known. At last, the doctor had emerged from the doorway, standing on the porch before the crowd. He looked like he could use a podium, nervously changing the position of his arms every few seconds, as if he didn't know what to do with his hands. He clearly wasn't born a public speaker, but he gave it his best shot. "Attention, attention, quiet please." The doctor had an overall pleasant, unthreatening demeanor, though he made little effort to downplay his insufferably condescending, heightened RP English accent. "Quiet, quiet, please," he continued. It wasn't until the few bilingual villagers in the crowd began translating for the rest that the chatter silenced. I remember seeing one such native I didn't recognize, no more than 8 years old, explaining the doctor's words to her mother. Her left brow jutted out distortedly over her eye, and her skin, like many of the suffering islanders, sadly was covered in lesions and blisters. I remember wondering how such a young child knew both languages so well. As the doctor went on, so did the impromptu translators. "As most of you are aware, Shift Captain Douglas and I are long-standing acquaintances, and once every month, the Shift Captain and I discuss the quality of your efforts and labor in the mines. You are all allotted generous compensation for your work, and may spend it as you choose." Well, in reality, there were only two things a leper in the village of Agrippina could spend money on for their work in the mines: food at the cookhouse and meds. I guess you could call that a choice, kind of. Along with a document that goes into a more intricate analysis of how hard you've worked, the shift captain sends me a color-coded card that signifies a rating of your toil. He does this month to month. Red is the worst, then orange, then yellow, and then blue. Green is the highest rating. Well, I'm happy to inform you all that the rating of your work this month is green. The crowd was silent. I think Geddes expected them to jump up in jubilation, or clap, or something. So then, you should all give yourself a rousing round of applause. Dr. Geddes tried to get them started by clapping first. The translators clarified every word he'd said, but no one clapped with him. Yes, well, that was the good news. I hope you all feel proud and enjoyed it somewhat, because I have some other news to share with you fine people. Due to shortages and issues with trade, there will be a rationing of thiamine and niacin, which means their prices will rise. However, the price of vitamin L will stay the same. So, by the word however, the crowd once again became unruly. If I needed these vitamins to stay alive, I'm sure I would have been pretty pissed too. Now, Geddes was smart enough to use the old con trick of pre-thanking them for their cooperation and understanding, even if they weren't understanding. He tried his best to speak over the disgruntled crowd, who were prattling swears in their native tongue while unintentionally chiming their bells. I want to extend my sincerest apologies on behalf of myself and Corporal Burke, and my thanks for your compliance at this difficult time. Thank you. He waddled back into the medic house with the quickness of a chicken into its coop after spotting a fox across the farm. Come, Mr. Rolfley. That was my cue. I could see the looks on their faces as I turned from the crowd back inside. Frustration. Anguish, but not rage. More like they were woefully accustomed to this kind of treatment. The only one who wasn't scowling was the girl, who seemed more unfazed than upset. I didn't know if she wasn't aware of what she was hearing, or she just didn't care. I was jealous of her optimism either way. Mr. Rolfley, if you please. Yeah, I'm coming. As I walked inside, I turned to shut the door, but remembered there wasn't one. So instead I just took a seat at the conference table and, like Burke and Geddes, tried to pretend I couldn't see the sea of frowns leering at us from the doorway outside. The crowd was taking painfully long to disperse. Ungrateful, that's what they are. Ungrateful savages. Why, did you see the way they looked at me? Never, never. Burke didn't seem rattled. Stop getting your britches in a twist. They'll take the inflated price and they'll like it. Do they have a choice? Well, no, not exactly. But they do scare me sometimes. I consider myself a compassionate person, but a man has his limits. I mean, did you see them? I saw you racing here with your asshole puckered. Let me pour you a drink. Roughly? Scotch? Rum, if you have it, I replied. Corporal Burke was an asshole. I wish I could describe him more eloquently or with more specificity, but there really wasn't much more to him. I'd hoped with his seniority and experience he'd be a wise, level-headed figure around here, but he was really just a child in an older man's body, a kid with a big gun. He was a large man, broad, cut shoulders, buzzed hair, and skin that glowed orange tan from the sun. He carried scars on his face, one that crossed diagonally down across his long, angular nose. I knew he'd seen a lot of shit in combat, shit you'd hope would mature a man, but I'd seen him around the village, seen how he treated the villagers. I'd heard stories of him up at the mine, standing guard. Villagers would come back at the end of the day bruised and beaten for, quote, slacking. Well, when he wasn't bullying them, that just left me and Geddes. He handed us our drinks and sat down. There, dog. Yeah, drink that. When your pansy ass regains consciousness, tell roughly what you told me. Dr. Geddes took his time finishing his glass and cleared his throat. Yes, Mr. Roffley, you've been here for, refresh my memory? 2.5 months, sir. 2.5 months, so then you've been here for long enough to, He paused. The Corporal and I have been running our humanitarian efforts out here to help these people for a number of years now. Before we'd come, we'd heard all kinds of preposterous claims about this island and its inhabitants. Rumors of cannibalism, kuru from cannibalism, rumors of human sacrifice, mysticism, gods that roam the island. Well, I've discussed it back and forth with Douglas. He seems to think the isle is plagued by an air of the supernatural. Ah, Douglas is a fucking quack. Bert cut in. Dr. Geddes continued. Indeed. Well, Mr. Roffley, as your better senses might have guessed, neither Corporal Burke nor I have seen hide nor hair of any such hocus-pocus. That is, until about a year ago. We were approached last August by one of the villagers, an elderly woman named Bimala. The woman told us that a friend close to her on the island was missing. Of course, we hadn't thought anything of it. I mean, the Corporal and I would both be millionaires if we had a nickel for every deadly animal species that lives within a 7-mile radius of the village. I mean, she could easily have been ripped apart by crocodiles, or eaten by a Bengal tiger, or, well, I could go on. The doctor rifled for a cigar through his box of Dominicans, put one between his teeth, bit the end and lit it after nervously fumbling to light the match. He again went on, more relaxed than before, but still with a stern expression. But this wasn't an isolated occurrence, unfortunately. More reports came in of a missing person, or missing persons, I should say. No warnings, no bodies found, utterly inexplicable disappearances. There wasn't even a pattern of quite which villagers were disappearing. They had no notable similarities. The only constant was that their disappearances were always after nightfall. The doctor sighed. This stopped a number of months ago, before you arrived. Whatever dark, unexplainable thing was going on here, we were at its mercy. We couldn't stop it or understand it. Needless to say, we welcomed it ceasing itself, and we all moved on. I could probably have guessed what the doctor was about to say. The truth was, I already pretty much knew. 3 days ago, a villager, you may remember named Ishan, was scheduled for his weekly medications and a vitals check. You were supposed to give him those medications. I know, Ishan never showed that day, I noted gravely. Ishan is nowhere to be found. He kept to himself primarily, but we've been looking for him. Someone would have seen him by now. No one knows where he is. The stout, moustached Englishman flicked the ash from his comically large cigar onto the bare wooden table and took another puff. I do so wish I could ignore this anomaly once again and wait for it to subside, but it's clear that whatever is going on in this village has resumed and has no intention of ending permanently. The doctor had been glaring at me during his monologue, and continued to do so moments after he'd finished. The silence was growing increasingly awkward, so I assumed it was my turn to speak. Forgive me, Dr. Geddes, but why are you telling me all this? Geddes and Burke gave each other a knowing look. Then he rose from his chair and sauntered toward the window beside the doorway, cigar still in hand. The crowd had dissipated at this point, and the locals were back to their routine. The doctor gazed at them as they walked by. In our quest to locate the leper named Isham, I'd heard accounts from a few of the English-speaking villagers that there is a young girl, a local, that regularly wanders outside of Agrippina, westward into the jungle on the uncharted parts of the island. The others say they keep their distance from this girl. She only interacts with anyone when they need her translations. She's bilingual. I already had a hunch of which kid he was talking about. It's quite disturbing, actually. Geddes did look disturbed. I've been informed that the child claims she has a friend in the jungle. Geddes continued staring at me to gauge my reaction. A human friend, a woman that she plays with who lives in the jungle. He sighed again. She says her friend's name is Kalisa. Forgive me, Doctor, if I'm not following. I spoke up again. But what does this girl have to do with the disappearances? Gettys's expression didn't change. I've yet to speak to the girl directly, but I have spoken with her mother, another afflicted. She told me her daughter's spouted claims that she knows where our missing lepers are. At this point, the doctor was again standing at the table, pouring Burke another drink, then himself, then resumed his slow pace around the room. The child's been saying that they went to see Kalisa. The old doctor spoke with a subtle, scoffing inflection that made it seem like he was aware of how silly these claims were, which didn't explain why he was entertaining them or why he was telling me. And, what do you make of this Kalisa business? I asked. Dr. Geddes returned to his seat across from mine, though he didn't look at me. He swirled his scotch for a moment while staring out of the doorway and was once more studying the villagers as they passed by. You must think it practically insane to even take a note of such a thing. Our children make outlandish assertions all the time. It's practically their profession. Corporal Burke, who at this point had graduated from using a glass and was just downing the scotch straight from the bottle, finally broke the silence. Yeah, it's also insane that a tenth of the island just got up and fucking vanished in the past year. We don't have a single reasonable lead. We can't afford to turn our nose up at this one, even if it is unreasonable. Personally, I couldn't give a shit about these people. The way they live, crazy shit like this probably happens all the time on this island. But less able-bodied lepers means less workers for the mines and less money coming in for vitamins and pharmaceuticals. Plus, whatever's out there picking these people off could come for us next. We don't even know what this thing is. You want that, roughly? I didn't answer him, or take notice of what he said at all. I never did. Dr. Geddes, what does all this have to do with me? I asked, with a half idea of where this was going already. Well, there could be someone escorting the quarantined villagers off the island for pay, though at this rate it surely would have caught naval attention. The corporal believes an officer would have alerted him by now. It could be a mad serial killer on the island picking them off. We don't know. All we have is this lead. Someone needs to follow this girl to wherever in blazes it is she goes, and see what comes of it. That's where I come in, I guess. The doctor went on. I'm far too old to be stumbling about through some untravelled, man-eating jungle off the coast of India and the Indo-Chinese peninsula, and, well, I'm afraid Corporal Burke is too crucial to the goings-on here in the village, and he's also getting up in age himself. I can still kick your ass, you peasant. As usual, your input is unnecessary, Mr. Burke. So, you want me to look into this because I'm expendable? I asked disgruntledly. "Oh, please don't look at it that way, dear boy," Geddes pleaded in his best good cop voice. "You'll be doing a great service. You'll be saving lives. Oh, I'm sure you only know that your sentence served here on the island, as opposed to in prison, only accounts if I write you a decent commendation to give to the courts. I'll make sure I give you a glowing review." As he spoke, the doctor smiled an oily smile that oozed extortion. I still wasn't convinced it was worth it to trail some girl through a perilous Indian wilderness, just to most likely end up another one of the dozens of vanished people. I don't know, Doctor. I still don't see why I should have to do this. I have to think about it. The smile slowly bent into a disaffected grimace. The elderly Englishman panned his eyes toward Burke, giving him unspoken permission to try convincing me his way. It was as if the good cop was tagging out and the bad cop was tagging in. Without hesitation, Burke slammed his glass bottle on the table, just short of shattering it, stood from his chair and loomed over me. I still didn't look at him, though he was close enough to blow his hot, liquor-soaked breath on me as he spoke. "You should do it because we told you to. You should do it because you're a sniveling shit who pushes dope and should be rotting in a prison cell the rest of his life, if there's any decent sense of justice in this world. You should do it because if you don't do it, we'll make sure you're in that prison, cleaning the shit out of every toilet on your block every single goddamn day till you choke on your own fucking vomit from the stench like the fucking insect you are." After taking a second to catch his breath, the corporal collected himself and sat back down in a relaxed position. "Oh, and, you should do it because we asked you so nicely." As I pulled a handkerchief from my pocket to dab the beads of saliva from my hair left over from Burke's compelling speech, the doctor tagged back in. "One of us must look into this. You really have the least to lose. It's only fair. You believe in fairness, don't you, Mr. Roffley?" I didn't reply to that, nor did Geddes expect me to. He and Burke did expect me to agree to their proposition, however. They each lit another Dominican, waiting for my response. "Fine, I'll do it." "Splendid. Burke will point you in the direction of the girl's hut. Speak with her mother if she's not there. She knows a little English. She'll let you know where she is. Off you go." At that, Dr. Geddes fixed himself another glass of Scotch whiskey and shuffled through the loose papers on his desk, pretending to read them to avoid eye contact with me. Burke rose from his seat and motioned for me to do the same and to follow him. We started down the dirt trail that led from the medic house, putting on our gloves and masks as we walked. At this point I'd become used to the sounds of children playing and the moos and clucks coming from behind the cookhouse. These people had enough problems as it was, and the fact they were being picked off by this, whatever it was just too much. "Well, it's pretty messed up, isn't it?" I asked Burke as he was lifting his mask to take another hit of his cigar. Yeah, sure it is. Life's hell. Look, listen. See that hut down there with the red and orange cloth draped over the fence? Make a left after you hit it. The second one on the right is hers." I nodded. "You think I could get one of those Dominicans?" His hand met my back with a forceful slap. "No. Now, don't come back to the medic house till you got something." He sauntered away, still puffing away with his mask stretched over his head. I walked past the cookhouse on my way there. I could smell from inside Tinsky, the village chef, quote-unquote, cooking and preparing a lunch pot of slop for the village. I had to admit, Agrippina did have a strange, inexplicable quality to it. I wondered whether or not there really was a kind of magic to this island, and how a small handful of Navy men could just waltz into it and help themselves to the mines and anything else they wanted. As I approached the door of the hut, I heard the singing of a child coming from the yard in the back. I guessed it was her, but I thought it best to speak with the girl's mother first. I knocked on the edge of the doorway. There was, again, no door, and waited for a response. There was none, but looking through the threshold into the dark, barren little home, I saw a silhouetted figure, A woman, seated by a would-be window, hole in the wall, cigarette in hand. Excuse me, Mom. No response. Excuse me, I'm sorry to bother you. May I come in? Her voice was hoarse and monotoned. Apia, se chala jai. I'm sorry, Mom. I don't speak Hindi. I'm here because I need to... I know why you're here. She's in the backyard. She took another drag, and as she did so, I could see her face in the window's light. It was badly coated with rugged, red patches. At that, I said a quick thank you and went around back. I guess I could understand her jaded disposition toward the Americans and British. I trusted Geddes about as far as I could throw him, and Burke went without saying. I suppose I was in the same club as those two. I could still hear that singing voice. Behind the back of the shambled hut was less of a yard and more concrete and dirt, surrounded by pockets of dandelions and crabgrass. In the center of one of those concrete slabs was the source of the artless voice. A heartbreakingly thin girl in a yellow shirt with an orange flower pattern and brown pants a couple of sizes too big, held to her waist by a makeshift rope belt, sitting with her back to the modest home. She was very short, save for her puffy, unkempt hair that seemed to give her another 5 or 6 inches in height. As I approached her, I noticed upon closer look her vehement focus on a drawing she was making with chalk on the ground. My instinct told me the drawing would be of a dog or a flower or whatever kids normally draw. Instead, what I saw was a woman, nude except for a skirt made of straw and a couple of colourful garlands around her neck. The woman was drawn with a gentle smile, but there was something definitely unsettling about her. "Is this Kalisa?" I asked. "Oh, forgive me, I didn't mean to sneak up on you like that." The girl stopped singing and looked up briefly to acknowledge my presence, and then returned her attention to the illustration. "That's okay, strange man," she said. "Yeah, she's my friend." "Yes, I heard. She looks blue, like a blueberry." She again looked up at me, then continued drawing. "And you're red, like a tomato, but doesn't really bother me." "Ah, yes, I guess I am. It's from the sun. I was white when I got here." "I know. I remember seeing you when you first arrived. I thought you were a ghost." While crouching down next to the kid, I noticed there were actually a few crude sketches in chalk of this friend all around the yard. "Can I ask you your name?" This time she didn't take her eyes off her drawing. "What's yours?" Well, I guess it was pretty weird for a stranger just to walk up to this girl and start asking her questions about who she was. I don't think I would have answered me either. "It's Lewis," I said. "Some people around here call me Rothley, but you can just call me Lou." She was silent for a moment before speaking up. "My name's Vina." "Vina? That's a cool name." "Thanks. I think it is too." "Vina, I don't know if you know who I am. I work at the medic house with the doctor, Dr. Geddes." "I've seen you." "I don't know if I've seen you there. Why don't you ever go get checkups or medicine? Don't you want to get better?" She cut me a side-eyed look as if that was a stupid question. I didn't know kids her age even did that. "Well, I used to. Kalisa said that vitamin L doesn't work, though. She's really smart." She said vitamin L doesn't work. "Is Kalisa a doctor?" I asked, thinking she wouldn't have an answer. "Are you?" she replied. Damn, I thought to myself, this kid's good. "Vina, can I ask you something?" She didn't answer, but the way she'd been concentrating on her picture, it seemed like she didn't care one way or the other. "Someone had told me that you know where the missing people of the island have gone. Is that true?" She was silent again, this time opting out of replying entirely. I figured I wouldn't wait for an answer. "Vina, can I meet Kalisa?" She snickered slightly at the question, an adult-like snicker. I again got the impression that this kid, who was definitely no more than 7 or 8 years old, was wise beyond her years. "That's funny," she said. "Funny and weird. You're funny and weird." "What's so funny about that?" I asked her. "Because she said today was the day." "Today is the day for what?" She set down her chalk, having finished her friend's portrait, and turned to me. "Today she's coming here, to the village. Kalisa said that I don't have to worry anymore, that no one does. She told me she'd fix everything. She said she'd heal everyone, like she healed the others." Well, at this moment in my head, I felt I should have had some kind of response for this young kid. There's an instinct adults have to want to always know just the right words to say to a child, even if they don't know what those right words are. I couldn't say anything. I couldn't speak. All I could do was try to keep my heart from sinking into my stomach. Heal everyone like the others? What the hell does that even mean? I didn't know in what God's name this Kalisa thing was. All I knew was that it was coming to the village, and that was bad fucking news. Apparently in the job description of a pretend leprosy nurse, you occasionally have to save the village from whatever the fuck a Kalisa is. Who knew? I cleared my throat and pretended as best I could that what this girl just told me wasn't as creepy as it was. "Vina, I think you should take me to Kalisa before she comes to the village. Is that okay?" She looked down to ponder the request. "I don't know. I don't think she'd like that. She doesn't know you. She only knows me." I had to think of something. "Vina, why does Kalisa only talk to you? Is she shy?" The girl nodded. "I thought so. Maybe it's best someone introduces her. But she has me to introduce her to everyone." "Do you know everybody here? I noticed you like to play by yourself. Do you talk to any of the other kids in the village?" After a brief hesitation, she shook her head. "I've never seen you at the medic house. Do you know the doctor, the corporal? I know most everyone here. I see them weekly to give them checkups. Maybe it's best that I meet Kalisa first. Then I can help her meet everyone else." The afflicted girl mulled over the offer once more. "What's that?" she asked, pointing to the cup and ball sticking from my left pocket. "Oh, it's a cup and ball. Can I have it?" I handed it to her. She gave it a few swings while I stood there until she excitedly landed the ball into the cup. "Okay, I'll take you there." "Great," I said. "Which way does Kalisa live?" She didn't say anything. All she did was point across the village toward the western jungle. She started walking. "Come on, strange man. I'll show you." I followed. "You know, you can call me Lou." "I know." We trudged through less than 100 yards of mud and branches and ivy before feeling like I was in another dimension. The branches extending from the treetops obscured most of the sky. Sight of civilization was already gone, and any sounds of human voices were replaced with the songs of tropical birds and the screeching of monkeys. Except for the sparkle of fallen drops of rain, every bit of light there was throughout the forest had a greenish-blue tint, as if it were a dream. Every living thing in this place wanted to kill or eat me, and my only guide into and out of it stood less than 4 feet off the ground. Less than that, not counting her hair. Oh, she didn't seem worried, though. She passed through thorn bushes and bacteria-filled puddles as if walking through her living room. I didn't know if I should have been comforted or disconcerted by that fact. But she'd walked through this tropical hell before and lived. She must have been doing something right. "So, Kalisa lives here?" I asked, trying to make conversation to distract my own nerves. "I don't think she lives anywhere," she answered after a while, again trying to get the ball into the cup. "But this is our special, secret spot where we play and talk sometimes. I still don't know if I should be taking you here. Are you sure it's better this way?" I told her it was, but in reality, the further we marched into these undiscovered woodlands, the less sure I was of anything. what I was going to do when I confronted this person or thing, how I ended up in this situation, who I even was. This jungle was surreal. Like, the further you ventured in, the more of yourself, your life, your identity, that you left behind. It wasn't natural, yet it was nature itself. I don't think it's possible to explain. I guess you just had to be there. I stopped momentarily to lift my mask and catch my breath, and at the moment of resting it back into place, I lost my breath again entirely. At my feet was what I'd at first thought was a striped vine, but vines don't hiss. It was a crate, one of the deadliest, most venomous snakes in the world. I was too close to run. I'd assuredly be bit before getting out of striking range. All I could do was futilely wait and think of a better idea. I tried, but instead my mind chose to flash through the memories of my life rather than come up with a solution. How did I end up here? Why can't I just function normally in society like a normal person? My childhood wasn't that bad. How did I end up trafficking blow for a living? The snake's fangs snuck ever closer, while my mind went adrift. I'd read a little about crates in one of Dr. Kettis's books on local flora and fauna that he kept on a bookshelf in the medic house. They usually only went after humans who were asleep. In that moment I was so still, I might as well have been. In a split second, I could no longer feel its body moving on my foot. I'd assumed it had already bit me and moved on. The crate's bite is notoriously painless, until I heard what sounded like the crack of leather on bark. I opened my eyes to find my 3.5-foot chaperone smacking the now-dead reptile against a tree like a lumberjack. She dropped its carcass at her feet and motioned her hand toward our destination as if to say, "Ready to keep going?" You saved my life," I told her. Now that I think about it, if you're going to keep spacing out like that, I might have to do it again before we get out of here. Do you have another mask with you by chance? I checked my pockets. Yeah, I do actually. Without skipping a beat, Vina grabbed the snake she'd just slayed and squeezed blood out onto her fingers from its wounds. She dropped it again and reached her not bloody hand out to me. I gave her the extra mask and, with the snake's blood, drew a frowny face on it. She then fastened it to the back of her head instead of her face. I would have been more disgusted if I wasn't so confused. "Okay, now your mask," she said plainly, reaching out her hand again. What are you What? I don't understand. Tigers. There are tigers in this jungle. They hunt by ambush. They attack you from behind when you aren't looking. Wearing a face on the back of your head will make them think you're always watching them. Does it... This works? Well, it didn't really make sense to me, but I knew this girl knew more about this place than I did. I don't think I should take off my mask. I mean, it's nothing personal, but when I'm around people infected... For whatever reason, I found it hard to finish this sentence. Strange, man. If you think I'm the most dangerous thing in this place, you're not going to last very long. Well, that did make sense to me. I took off my mask and gave it to her. She gave it the same blood frown treatment. I took it back and wore it, the same as she did, and 2 bloody frowns receded further into the endless jungle. "We're almost there," she said after some time, breaking the silence. "Good. I'm guessing whatever Kalisa's plan is, we might not have much time before she decides to put it into action." She didn't say anything. "Vina," I asked, "why are the people of the village gone? What does it have to do with your friend? Did Kalisa do anything to them?" She looked slightly offended. "No, Kalisa didn't hurt anyone." "Then what happened to them?" I insisted. "I feel I could help you better if you'd tell me." Well, the look on her face suggested she was conflicted about what to say, but eventually told me what was happening. "Kalisa visited them, but not in real life, in their dreams. She needs them so that she can help us. She tells them she needs their prana, their spirit, and then wakes them up.
And then what? I asked.
Then they go to her, of course. She rolled her eyes again, as if it were another stupid question.
Have you ever had one of these dreams?
She shook her head. No, but she told me. She tells me everything. We're best friends, remember?
Right.
I decided not to ask any more questions until we got there. Every time I did, I just ended up having a lot more. The jungle was dark as the night at this point, though it couldn't have been more than 2 or 3 p.m. in the afternoon. At least, I thought it was afternoon. All I could see were shades of black and green, and all I could hear was a cool, singing wind that blew through the forest, punctuated by the jingling of Vina's bell and the crunching of leaves and twigs beneath our footsteps. I couldn't even hear the animals anymore, just the wind.
"Kalisa!"
Vina yelled. My heart jumped at her shout. I could see her run up ahead, but I couldn't tell to what at first. And then I saw her. Through bushes and thickets and vines stood a woman. It was disheveled and so black it didn't even look like individual strands, more like one large shadow in the shape of a cloaking mane. Her skin was a royal blue, much like Vina's picture. And like Vina's picture, she was naked, not including her garland and her skirt. But this garland wasn't of flowers. It was a string necklace of shrunken human heads that bled from their eyes and mouth. And her skirt was not made of straw. It was made of gored, dismembered human arms. I remember how much her smile was just like her picture, right down to the creepiness factor. I'd only seen such a smile on murals of Jesus Christ or on the Mona Lisa, but I'd never seen so much blood come with a smile like that. It only made her expression that much more disturbing. Her eyes blinked slow and seldom, and her leer passed through me like 2 spears to the head. Vina hugged her friend and looked up at her. She spoke to the blue woman in Hindi, nothing I could understand. All I could do was stand there awkwardly while the girl talked. Kalisa never broke her smile, nor did she break eye contact with me while listening to Vina go on. I was petrified to look away from her for fear of what this woman, this thing, might do. For a moment, I did glance at her garland. The faces around her neck were unfamiliar to me, all except one, which looked a lot like the missing villager Ishan. Eventually, Vina finished her explanation for me being here. Again, all that could be heard was the wind. The woman didn't say anything. She didn't react at all. Her expression didn't change. It never changed. After a moment or two of what seemed like time frozen still, she walked toward me, quickly. I blinked, and in a second, the warm but eerie grin that would a stone's throw away was at arm's reach. She was nearly 7 feet tall. Her eyes were kind, but if the flesh that decorated her body was any indication, this inhuman thing before me was not. She was a monster. Her left arm clutched me by the throat and raised me off the ground without the slightest hint of strain, while her right pulled a scimitar sword from its scabbard, strapped behind her back. She cocked back the blade as if readying her swing, and a freakishly long tongue unravelled out of her now open-mouthed grin. I could faintly hear Vina shrieking in her native tongue from behind her in a way that sounded like she was begging her to stop. I couldn't tell exactly what she was saying. Even if I could speak Hindi, I wouldn't have understood. I couldn't hear, smell, or feel anything. My senses failed, and once again time was still. I couldn't even feel the fear of my impending death. All I could think about was the juxtaposition of the blue woman's genial, loving gaze and her obvious lust for human offal. It was indescribable. The next thing I knew, my back was hitting the dirt below. This awesome, beastly woman was standing over me. Vina was tugging on her skirt of arms, still pleading for her to stop. I could only assume she still wanted to kill me, but I couldn't know for sure because she just kept smiling that smile. That insane fucking smile. As if in a horrible, off-key harmony, this creature called Kalisa, along with the heads that rested around her neck, spoke together in a sing-song unison in both high and low pitches. The painful, collective sound of their voices nearly made blood bust from my ears, though they only spoke 2 words. Samapan, Upcharatmak, they screamed as one. And with that, a white flash of light exploded throughout the forest like lightning, and drops of rain began to fall through the treetops from the sky. She was gone, and I was left touching my chest and face, convincing myself that I was actually here, and that what had just happened was real. "Are you okay, Lou?" asked Vina. I don't know," I said, stuttering. "What was that, Vina? What did she say? What's going to happen?" The girl didn't answer. She just stared back in the direction we'd come, and then looked back at me. "We should go back to Agrippina now," she said solemnly. Not wasting time, I clumsily got back on my feet, and we started back to the village. By the time we'd reached Agrippina, it was pouring rain heavily. It was hard to see more than 10 or 20 feet in any direction. We'd reached the trail that led down from the medic house, enough to be able to faintly see it up the road. But every instinct I had told me not to go there. The downpour of the storm blurred my vision a great deal, but I could make out something in front of it. Something small, about the size of a volleyball, laid in front of the medic house, slumped and drooping. I couldn't see just what it was, but my gut told me it had something to do with Vina's friend. "Come on," I said, grabbing her hand. "Where are we going?" she asked. "I'm taking you back to your mother's house. When you get there, lock your doors and hide, okay?" Okay, but I don't have a door. Oh, shit, I forgot. Look, then just hide, all right? Okay. We ran there as fast as one could through the storm. The entire town was suspiciously quiet and empty. Where the hell is everyone? I thought. We made it most of the way when, passing the window of the cookhouse, I saw 2 silhouetted figures walking back and forth against the glowing light of a burning lantern inside. I recognized both of those silhouettes. "Go to your place," I told Vina. "Run inside and stay safe." "Where are you going?" she asked. "I've got someone I've got to see." I knelt down to her eye level. "I don't know what's going to happen. Look, if I don't see you again, well, just take care of yourself." "It's okay, Lou. Kalisa won't hurt you." "She just tried to kill me a few minutes ago, didn't she?" Yeah, but I told her you're okay. She only hurts bad people." "I don't know if that means I'm in the clear, kid." "I think it does." She hugged me, then skipped merrily through the rain toward home. As the jangle of her bell and the metronome sound of her skipping footsteps faded further away, I could hear her singing her song again. I jogged up to the cookhouse cabin and banged on the wood paneling under the window. Burke, what's going—" Before I could finish the word "going," the blast of a shotgun round fired out the window just over my head, nearly scalping me with shrapnel. "Jesus Christ! Burke, it's me, Lou," I shouted. Roughly, is that you?" "Yes, goddammit. What the hell happened?" "Son of a... Get in here." The corporal stuck his head out to make sure it was me, then reached out with his arms, grabbed my collar and pulled me inside like a rag doll. He didn't waste his breath explaining himself. "Grab a plank. Help us bar this place up." He walked over to a pile of 2x4s gathered against the cafeteria counter to hand me one. Tinsky was by the doorway, hammering the last plank of wood across it to make sure no one could get through. Oh, needless to say, whatever Kalisa was planning once she got to the village, it was already underway. "Here," barked Burke, handing me a wooden plank. "Start barricading the windows. There's another hammer and some nails on the dining table over there." He picked back up his .870 pump shotgun and started pacing around the room. His face was dripping wet. I couldn't tell if he got caught in the rain or if he was just that unnerved. "Damn it, Burke. You almost took my head off just now. What is happening? Where's Dr. Geddes?" Moaned Tinsky. "Jesus, Rafi, if you say the words head off and Geddes in the same breath again, I'm going to throw you out the window you came in." "What? I don't understand." "Something came here," Burke said finally. "To the village. Some woman with blue skin. I'd have thought I was hallucinating if I didn't already know how fucking unholy this place was. Geddes and I were at the medic house. Well, I was half drunk. Didn't see her till she was there outside the door. And Geddes, oh God." He stopped. I never thought I'd ever seen tears fall from Corporal Burke's eyes, but there were plenty of things that day I thought I'd never see. He was almost choking, trying to hold back his sobs. It grabbed the little guy by the arm, lifted him in the air, and he took a deep breath and cut his fucking head from his body like it was made of wet sand. There was a long silence after he said that. "How did you escape?" I asked. The corporal took out a flask from the inner pocket of his fatigues and downed a few gulps before answering. She threw his head out in front of the porch and started... He exhaled again and started eating his remains. I guess that explains the volleyball, I thought. "I fired at it, point blank, 4 separate goddamn times," he went on. "Didn't even flinch. It just kept feeding. The radio was out. What the hell else could I do? I crawled out the window like a goddamn coward and came here." And at that, he could choke back his sobs no more. "I knew it." Tinsky panicked. "I knew this place was fucking evil. We should never come here." There was something that bothered me about how he put that. Come here? What did he mean? "You say that like you chose this place," I said, audibly confused. "Weren't you stationed in Agrippina?" For a moment, no one responded to my question, and then gradually Burke's whimpering morphed into an almost maniacal chuckle. I wasn't amused. "Something funny, Burke?" I asked. He continued laughing. "Where'd they find this guy?" he said to Tinsky, motioning to me. His snickering diminished as he turned to look back at me. "How stupid are you, Roughly? Were you born in prison? You must have been in there your whole life to not know how anything works." I felt kind of defensive at that. Burke was clearly wasted, though he had a point. I'd been away for 10 years, but even on the outside I wasn't the worldliest guy. I really didn't know how anything worked. Never learned how to do taxes. I didn't vote. I didn't, still don't, know the difference between a premium and a deductible. I'm just a drug dealer that got caught in the wrong country. Well, it's not a stretch that I didn't understand the finer machinations of the English military. The corporal lit another Dominican to cool his composure after his episode. "Well, humor me then," I said. "Explain to this idiot just what the hell you're talking about." "Roughly, why do you think we're out here? Why do you think England still has some ships on the Indian Ocean and still occupying these islands even though they pulled out of India years ago?" Tinsky cut in. "Burke, I don't think you should be saying..." What the fuck does it matter? We're all gonna die out here anyway." I was embarrassed that I still wasn't following at this point, but I kept that to myself. "You know how much money there is in the mines out here on these leper colony islands? Iron, titanium, manganese, granite, garnets and diamonds even. The islanders don't have contact with the mainland. They're just as much in the dark as you are. They don't know we're not supposed to be here. No one does. The mining companies are still operating out here, using the afflicted populace as low-cost labor. I was depressingly unsurprised by what Burke had told me. I shouldn't have been, knowing how the locals were treated. There's just one thing I still didn't understand. They use villagers for cheap labor and treat them for leprosy. Why? He chuckled again. You know, that's what I always liked about you, Roffley. You're a funny son of a bitch. What's the joke, arsehole? I'd run low on patience for his condescension. He gave one last look at Tinsky, then turned his head to me. They're not treating anyone. The thiamine or whatever the hell else don't do anything. That vitamin L, it's a placebo. Not that the lepers know that. Well, they found a cure for leprosy a few years back. It's called Dapsone. Geddes ever have you give Dapsone to any of the villagers? He took my silence for a no. Didn't think so. He took another swig from his flask. Everything fell into place that second. I didn't know how, but I knew why this monster, this whole island, would want us dead. I guess it's the part where I'd say the cliché, oh, maybe we're the real monsters. But do I really need to? Besides the banging of hammer on nail from Tinsky trying to board up the last window, I would have sworn I went deaf again at that moment. The rain outside sounded like white noise, and for what seemed like hours, no one said a word. Eventually, that silence was broken. How do you think Douglas is holding up? Tinsky asked before finishing putting up the last board, seemingly only to make conversation. You already know the answer to that, Tinsky, uttered Burke in a defeated, apathetic monotone. Now shut up. I'm trying to drink myself to death over here. You're breaking my concentration. You know what, Burke? You're just... What, Tinsky? Burke asked slowly, mockingly answering his rhetorical question just to interrupt him. You act all tough with that gun, but when your life's really in danger, you're just a big Mary. You're supposed to be the muscle around here. When you actually have to do your job by protecting us, you curl up into a ball and cry and piss yourself. You Mary. Burke burped. You think my job is fighting a giant demonic blue Amazon woman for you? My job's protecting the mines, you idiot, not you. The garbage you cook. If I shot your fat ass right now, skinned you, cooked you, and served you to the tribe, I'd be doing your job better than you ever did. Shut up. Go ahead and insult me. I don't care. I just know that I'm going to get off this island. I'm getting no help from you. Roffley, you can come if you want, but I'm not staying here anymore. Just as he'd finished nailing in the last 2x4, Tinsky put down his hammer and began pulling it off the very same window to climb out. You insane? You'll be killed out there. He ignored Burke and continued prying off the wooden plank. The corporal staggered to his feet gracelessly. Did you hear me? I order you to stop right now. Order my ass. Tinsky. As quick as the flash that pierced through the jungle when Kalisa had disappeared, the second Tinsky had released the plank from its nailed position, the crash of a blade, crimson and silver, shot through the window, splitting through the cook's skull. The blue hand that held that blade by its hilt then drew it back outward, and the once living man fell to the floor. Well, I wanted to yell, "What the fuck?" or something, but I couldn't speak. The corporal and I were both on our feet by this point, but my knees were buckling, barely keeping me up. Burke looked like he was going to faint. The instant we saw Tinsky's life taken from him, he vomited. I stumbled over to him, giving no thought about stepping in it, and grabbed him aggressively by the collar. You scumbag. You've doomed us all. What are we going to do? We're going to die, Roffley. We're going to die. He was breaking down again. We're going to die. We're going to die. Oh, we're going to die. I drew back my arm and backhanded him across the face. "Snap out of it, you drunken fool." After I'd struck him, he laid his head to the side for a while, facing the windows, just kind of resting there, having nothing to say in reply. At first I thought it was because he didn't want to look at me. Then I realized his eyes were fixated on something. I looked over and saw her. Through the creases in between the remaining boards that covered the windows, we could both see her walking her way glacially past window after window. I couldn't make out much, but for the brief split seconds it was visible, I could see that heinous smile. She was making her way around the cabin for the door. I took my hands from the distraught corporal's collar. He took one more unhelpful swig of whiskey and tossed his flask to the ground. He pumped and raised his trusted 870 and pointed it at the door. "I thought you said that thing didn't work," I said. "I just didn't get a good shot off last time. But I'm blow this bitch in two. You watch me." He was clearly more loaded than his gun. I had to admit I had no ideas, but I knew shooting at this thing wasn't a great one. She was in front of the door, still as a painted canvas. Between two planks across the doorway, I could see her eyes. Through a knot in the wood, I could see a fraction of a Prussian blue grin. "Stand aside, roughly," slurred the drunken corporal. "Got in, finished business, you know." I stepped back. I didn't know if this shell of a man was brave or just facing a death wish, but I wasn't either. We stood shaking like two thin, broken, uprooted trees ready to fall, awaiting the monstrous woman's next move. Board by board, she ripped the planks away like band-aids, taking her time as if she knew we had nowhere to run. The gun in Corporal Burke's grip trembled more with every passing second. He cocked the forend. His face was dripping with sweat again. She didn't bother taking off the final board at her feet. She merely stepped over it, aiming her Madonna gaze at Burke as she did. He fired, with each roaring sound of the trigger pulled, leaving a ringing in our ears. He fired again and again and again. And she wasn't fazed, stepping toward him as if she was being pelted with M&Ms rather than shotgun shells. He fired one final time as she grabbed the gun by the barrel. Holding onto the gun with his right hand, he threw a desperate, wild, and inebriated left hook, only to be caught again by Kalisa's other hand. I stood and watched in horror as she lifted the man up with her hands like a child, just as she did me. While she held Burke suspended, kicking and screaming, two additional arms tore and grew from atop her shoulders above her other ones. Burke shrieked even louder, as if he were rupturing his vocal cords in the process. She kept his body steady in the air with her lower arms, grabbed the top of his buzzed head with her upper left, and raised her sword with her upper right. "Samapan!" she cried along with her garland of heads. I couldn't watch. I fell to the ground, covering my eyes, with the black, metallic sound of a slice, a sound I'd only previously heard coming from the slaughterhouse out back. His screams were no more. And then she devoured him. I couldn't see it, but you can't mistake a sound like that, nor do you forget it, ever. After that it was quiet. I was afraid to open my eyes like a frightened toddler, as if covering them was the same as disappearing. It must have been a full minute since the sounds of chewing and ripping and tearing and swallowing were finished before I opened my eyelids. First thing I saw were two royal blue legs. I looked up. She was standing over me. A trickling river of maroon red dripped from that same virgin merry smile she'd had since I'd first seen her in the jungle. Oh, that felt like years ago, but in reality it had only been a few hours. She slowly reached for the hilt of the scimitar. I wanted to close my eyes again, but I was too frozen to even blink. As she wrapped her fingers, one at a time, around the handle. A jingling sound came from outside, followed by a loud but gentle voice. "Kalisa, tumkahan ho." It was Vina. The blue woman unhinged her grip and laid her arm by her side. Still eyeing me, she spoke one last word. She spoke softer than she had before, without the heads that laid around her neck, but definitely loud enough for me to hear. "Parivata." She unhurriedly backed away, turned, stepped over the board across the foot of the doorway, and walked outside, saying something back to Vina as she did. The rain settled, and, as if on cue, the local, tropical birds began chirping and squawking in tandem with the shining of the sun. The sound of villagers talking with one another in Hindi could be heard from outside. I got up, weakly, and plodded to the doorway, almost tripping on the 2x4 as I walked past it. As I stood on the porch of the cookhouse, I'd found the chattering was coming from people I'd never met, though I did recognize them. They were the heads that hung around Kalisa's neck, now actual people with actual bodies underneath them. I assumed they'd looked this way before they went missing, better than before, as now their skin was as healthy and clean as anyone I'd ever seen. All of them were healed. I almost didn't recognize Ishan, who was laughing with his friends. They were all acting as if nothing had ever happened. To this day, I don't even know if they knew anything had. Vina was drawing a picture on the porch with her chalk. I was surprised to see it was of a smiling sun. I would have figured that was too normal for her. Well, her infection, and any sign of it, like her fellow villagers, was now gone. "I told you wouldn't die," she said. "Yes, I guess you were right about, well, everything." "Yep." "Where did Kalisa go?" "Don't know." Well, that was a good enough answer for me. "Hey, maybe I didn't hear right, but did your friend say anything to you before she left?" "Yeah, she told me to tell you not to sell drugs anymore," she said, as matter-of-factly as ever. I sighed and nodded. "Yeah, I think I figured that out on my first day in prison." "What are drugs?" I didn't answer that, but I did take the advice. Vina and the other villagers stayed on the island. I stayed with them for the remainder of my stay, treating them for any other ailments they had as best I could. I reported the deaths of the others, but I told them a tiger had rampaged through the village. Convincing naval officials that a tiger decapitated multiple people isn't easy, but I figured convincing them that a giant blue, four-armed naked woman decapitated multiple people would have been less so. I was allowed release on payroll after my time served on the island. I think there was an unspoken agreement that if they took me back to prison, they'd risk me leaking their operation to the public. So we all instead decided to look at the whole situation from the rearview mirror. I left Agrippina after 6 months, never to see any of them ever again. I can only hope they got along fine by themselves. I know of at least one friend they can turn to if they run into trouble again. When I left, I managed to swipe and smuggle a good armful of Getty's hydrocone stash, a stash that he'd ordered for his patients but kept to himself. I never sold coke again, but I've been wrestling on and off with painkillers ever since. It's horrible shit, but it's that or the panic attacks. And so, well, that's it. That's my crazy story told by a crazy old man. I don't know why I'm telling you all this. I don't expect anyone to believe me. I don't really need anyone to. Truth is, though, I remember it well. It was so long ago, I'm not even sure I believe it myself anymore. Well, I'm lonely, I guess. I guess I could just use a friend myself. Bloody bones and green eyes. Samuel L. Clinton, Sam C. to his associates and customers alike, tramped down the trail that led to the driveway of the Travis Broxton family. That would in turn lead to Farm to Market Road, 1988, and from there to his friend Wahoo's house, where he'd left his car. It was a long walk after dark, but worth it. Roxton's extended family was in town. Some of them had decent money and had been willing to part with it in exchange for some first-class blends of a certain THC-producing plant. Well, he and Wahoo had worked on the blend for years, and it was infamous in the area. He was, of course, stoned out of his gourd, but hey, he had to party with these suburbanites and yokels to get them fired up to buy all that he'd brought. He managed to collect $250 profit from the relatives and was feeling satisfied. They'd even fed him, and one or two of the girls had shown some interest in slumming with him. And he'd definitely be back tomorrow night. As he wove his way through the brush, he thought he heard a noise, or noises. Not loud, but all the other night sounds had stopped. He looked around and saw nothing but shadows under the bright moonlight. He was about to cross a small clearing full of goatweed plants and grass. He'd have to stay on the path to avoid the bull nettles. Those things hurt like fire, and he'd have to piss on the affected area to get rid of the sting. So he'd been told as a child, and he swore by it. His mind was still foggy and wandered. It rushed back to the present when he saw a large shadow move, and then a head stared at him from out of the tangle beneath the trees. Large green eyes gazed at his own and held him transfixed. And then they blinked. It broke the spell, and he picked up his pace. Couldn't be more than 200 yards to the driveway. He remembered this track. He recalled the clearing. Once he made it to the road, he'd be safe. He stumbled along, his high rapidly fading along with his remaining physical coordination. His fear morphed into panic when the eyes appeared in front of him, and he heard the rush of a large body in a roaring scream. His hindbrain, a feature left over from generations of evolution, knew that sound, as had his primitive ancestors. It caused the release of all bodily functions that were not critical for survival. It didn't matter. The mess in his britches was the least of his worries. Sam C. was on the ground and dying before he could let out a scream of his own, the result of which was a feeble, mewling sound, all that he could manage. Uncle Jim spoke in his low, raspy voice to the enthralled family members and friends, especially the children who encircled him around the bright campfire. He just finished telling a tale that ended with bloody bones and green eyes, which elicited some intakes of breath and squeals of not quite fear, yet the little ones clamored for more, supported by the adults who'd always loved his campfire stories. He sat back for a moment, scratched his beard, and pretended to think. Well now, this one ain't all that scary, but you might like it, since it happened to me and happens to be true. When I was a young'un, the old folks shared all kinds of strange stories, and many of them featured cats, especially black cats. And at this, he leaned forward and raised his eyebrows and bugged his eyes to the delight of his audience. I was walking, well, to be honest, stumbling drunkenly, back home from Maydon's beer joint near Black Cat Ridge. They called it an ice house. Guess that sounded better to some folks. Tiny little place. They always had fresh catfish heads mounted by the door. Don't know why. Made the place stink. Maybe they wanted people to throw up so they'd buy more booze. He waited as the crowd made barf noises and cheered him on. Well, that night, I'd had a good long taste of Lefebvre's Folly, a local moonshine. So I was in a merry mood and enjoying my moonlight stagger. It was a really bright full moon that night, made for spooky silver shadows, especially along the little dirt road that wound through willows covered in drooping Spanish moss. I jumped. He said this last word with emphasis, and raised his hands in grasping fingers. Uncle Jim's stories weren't always scary, but his behavior as he told them invariably was. When I heard a loud and deep hoot, 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 hoot. It was just an owl, but in the dark and by myself like that, it sure scared me. My first thought was, ghost. I heard a woman scream off in the distance. I knew better, though. That was a cougar. Good thing, though, it wasn't far away, and if it was prowling, chances were that the other big critters and booger bears would hunt elsewhere. As I walked up to the little bridge over Ben's branch, though, I got a funny feeling, a sort of chill down my spine, like a spook was nearby. Hardly anybody used this old dirt road and wooden bridge anymore. It was scary even in daylight. As I was about to stop out on the feeble old bridge, I saw a figure in front of me. It sat right in the middle of the bridge. It was a big old black cat. Not a panther or cougar, mind you. Plenty of stories about them big ones. But big, maybe like old Melvin, my black lab. It had huge, green, glowing eyes, and the moonlight made the whole thing kind of shimmer and shine. It blinked its eyes at me, and then, no kidding, it spoke. He went quiet and waited for it. True to form, one of the younger children asked, "What did it say, Uncle Jim?" It said, "Follow me, darling," in a voice like that of an old woman. Then it swirled away and jumped off that bridge. Now, Ben's branch was swollen. It was springtime and rainy, so anywhere that cat would have landed would have caused a splash, but I never heard one, nor saw it neither. Now I knew that cats weren't supposed to speak, at least not in human talk. So I up and decided to walk the main road. I just have to suffer the extra distance and risk the laws catching me drunk and taking me to jail for the night. Now a talking cat ain't all that spooky, but the next day I found that the old bridge had finally given up and fallen into the branch that night. If I'd walked on it, well, wouldn't be here telling tales. The moral to that one is that black cats don't always mean bad luck. Sometimes they're just a warning. There was general applause, and Uncle Jim excused himself as another family member brought out a fiddle, and others brought out various instruments and began an impromptu concert. One of the older boys, mid-teens, approached Jim as he left the campfire circle. TJ, Travis Jr., sidled up to his great-uncle. He didn't say anything. He just walked alongside the elderly man. Jim stopped out of the circle of light from the fire and started to urinate. The act no longer held any embarrassment for him, since he was pushing 80. TJ shrugged and then emulated his older relative. Jim didn't mind. He'd worried some for the boy who'd lost his father last year. Natural for him to cling to elder men in the family with his dad, poor Travis Sr., gone. Oh, awful ending. Getting eaten by a sounder of saber-toothed hogs. Jim realized that if he was going to figure out what the boy wanted, he'd have to ask. "So, TJ, how are you and your ma and your sis doing?" TJ shrugged. "All right, I guess. It's been hard on Ma, though, having to work while Cassie and I go to school. I turn 16 soon, so I can get a regular job and help her. I've been helping with farm work and odd jobs when I get them." He trailed off. Clearly he wanted to ask something, so it was Jim's turn to wait. "Uncle Jim, I looked into Black Cat Ridge. What you said about the moonshine?" Jim cackled a little. "Yep, homemade corn liquor. Repulsive stuff. Stunts your growth." TJ looked down, clearly in thought, then looked up a little startled. "Oh, I didn't want any. I was just thinking about the people who've been there for a while. Dad didn't talk about it until just before he went down to help with the feral hog problem. He said the place could be nasty with the swamps around it, and even more with the people who live nearby. It was hard, but I found out everything I could about what had happened to him. Well, I'm proud of him for trying to help." Jim patted his shoulder. "Well, TJ, I'm sure proud that you know how to research. For all that he played the hillbilly, your dad was a bookworm when no one was watching." He laughed a little at the fond memories of Travis Sr. "Now, how about we get back to the others and scrounge up some grub?" TJ nodded and smiled. He'd found the approval he'd needed, and since he was 15, food always interested him. The rest of the family packed up the next day. It was Labor Day weekend, and most of them had to be in work or school on Tuesday. There were many hugs and handshakes and promises of, "We'll talk to y'all soon." TJ and his little sister Cassie watched as Uncle Jim, the last to leave, started to pile into his old pickup truck. "Uncle Jim, thank you for all the stories. Sure was good to see you," TJ said a little shyly. The old man grinned, his yellow teeth contrasting with his white beard as he stretched out his hand for a manly shake. "TJ, glad to see you growing into a man like your dad. He was my favorite nephew, even though he was the youngest. Nobody can miss him as much as you and your sister do, not even your mother, well, in a different way. You all keep looking out for one another, and if you need anything, you holler. Oh, and don't go looking for the wild hogs outside the, intranet." Well, the children assured him they would not, and Cassie gave him a big arms around his waist hug. He climbed up into the cab and was soon a receding plume of dust as he headed down the dirt road that led to their home. The gatherings had been held here at the old farmstead property since Jim was a boy. The property had been in the family for longer than that. It was still pretty far from anything, just a small gas station town. Well, they now had an off-brand dollar-something store that was somewhere between a grocery and a convenience store, what the old-timers called a whatnot store, and they had a feed, seed, and hardware all in one. That wide spot in the road was 6 miles from their place. The nearest town of any size was 30 miles. TJ gave his little sister a playful and very gentle shove. "You ready for school? Gonna be a freshman. A fresh woman, that is." He grinned at the last. Cassie rolled her eyes. "Yeah, how about you? You'll be a senior. Mr. 1 year ahead of everyone else. Soon to be employed, hotshot." TJ's grin widened. "Ready as ever. I really want to get done with high school." He trailed off as they approached the front porch. "Hey, I'll be back in a little while. I want to go walk down to the pond and clean up some of the mess the cousins made before it rains. Tell Ma I'll be back soon, and I'll take care of cleaning up outside the house." Cassie nodded. "Okay. You gonna take your gun?" TJ shrugged. "Nah, got my big knife, and it's just a little walk. Not staying long, and with all the people we've had running around, nothing'll be lurking at the pond. Besides you." She stuck out her tongue and then dashed inside the house. They were lucky to have one another these days. It had been almost a year since their father had died. He'd gone to help hunt down some saber-toothed hogs and had become one of the heroic figures to perish under the teeth and hooves of those monsters. The sheriff down there had sent him a photo of the head of the beast that was now mounted in his office. There was a plaque beside it that read, PIG, Pride, Integrity, Guts, dedicated to those who went forth to serve and give their all. He hardly considered it a prized possession, but he understood that the man had meant well. His mother had almost vomited when she'd seen the photo on his screen. That thing had killed and eaten her husband, the father of her children, the love of her life. TJ made it to the large pond and began to make his way around it. No doubt some of his idiot cousins had sneaked beer or dope out into the woods. They'd have left the litter near the pond, and sure enough, in the clearing around their old fort were several empty beer bottles and a few butts from cigarettes and blunts. He'd left a trash bag tied to a nearby tree, but none of the refuse had made it inside. He gathered it all and set down the bag. He really wanted a few minutes to himself. He skimmed a few rocks across the otherwise still surface of the old cow pond as he processed the concerns of his life. Then he noted an odor. Something foul. Not overwhelming, but fresh. The odor of recent death. Travis Sr. had raised his son to hunt and track and to pay attention to the woods around him when they were outdoors. The coppery scent of blood, the foul stench of open viscera, and the gamey smell of a dead mammal caught his attention. He paused to check the wind direction, and then started walking upwind in search of the source of the stink. He found the general area from which the scent had originated, but saw no carcass, until he looked up. In the crook of a tree was lodged a body. Not a deer or a hog as he'd expected. This mass of necrotic flesh and clothing had been a person. He recognized only the bloodied jeans as clothing. The rest of the remains were mangled and stained with dried bodily fluids. He backed slowly away from the tree. He looked all around to ensure that the predator wasn't nearby. He knew better than to run, but it took every ounce of his self-discipline to keep his feet moving at a moderate pace. At the pond, he paused to pick up the trash bag, and then increased his pace back toward home. Along the way, he was sure that something tracked him. No, paced him. He caught glimpses of a dark sheen out among the shadows and trunks of the pines that surrounded the area. At one point, he could have sworn he'd seen a pair of eyes flash at him. Large, green eyes. The figure was lost from view as a small tree with leprous bark obscured it for a moment, and then it was gone. The feeling of being stalked evaporated, and TJ hurried in earnest, not quite running, to his home. Well, he hadn't wanted to tell his mother, but he had to. She handled it better than he'd feared, though he'd hated to cause her more grief. She got on the phone, and the sheriff's office soon had a deputy on the way. After a few more calls, everyone who'd attended the gathering was accounted for, so at least no one from the family had been harmed. The big deputy arrived, and TJ took him out to the site. This time he carried his rifle and the Bowie knife his dad had given him for his 13th birthday. It was late afternoon, but they had plenty of sunlight left. When they arrived at the death tree, TJ remained alert and looked for his erstwhile stalker. And then he noticed that the tree was empty. There was still gore on it, and it still reeked of mortal remains. "I know this is the right tree. You can see the blood." He gaped in confusion. The deputy eyed him suspiciously. He'd looked askance at the boy when he'd insisted on being armed, despite being in the presence of an armed deputy. The kid and his mother had cajoled him into digging in the trunk of his car and taking along his issued AR. "Now, TJ, corpses don't get up and leave. You know this area, no doubt. What you've reported is very serious. We can't have people calling and wasting our time. What kind of game are you playing? You've never been a problem kid." TJ just looked astonished. Is this dude blind or just lazy? He had to ask himself. "I'm sure. Let's please just take a look. I know what I saw, and my dad taught me not to lie, especially to the laws." His dad had also taught him tracking, and in the shadowy light of late afternoon under the canopy of the piney woods, he circled the tree in search of signs. There wasn't much to be seen among the leaves and pine straw, but there, clearly drag marks that led deeper into the woods. He pointed. "There, that's where something dragged him out of the tree and into the deeper woods. Look, you can still see the blood and other stuff on the tree bark." Deputy Briscoe looked, but was clearly unconvinced. It's just some leaves moved around, and yeah, that looks and smells like blood, but, well, something sure stinks, but how do I know it's human blood? Without some proof, we don't need to be wasting any time out here traipsing through the brush. Without a body, we don't have any evidence." TJ found himself again, looking astonished. "So, you aren't going to do anything? Maybe take some samples or photos?" The deputy rolled his eyes. "I'll get the evidence tech to come out tomorrow and get a sample. Look, in the meantime, let's get you back home. You'll stay out of the woods until we can get back in good daylight." TJ quickly snapped a few photos on his phone and accompanied Briscoe back to the house in sullen silence. Travis Sr. had never held much faith in the local constabulary, and TJ was picking up the same attitude. He griped to his mother and sister for a while, before they had supper, but there was nothing else really to do. They all settled in and prepared for the first big day of school. Hopefully Deputy Briscoe could find his way back to the tree with the evidence tech. TJ's hopes were dashed at about 4 a.m. the next morning. It started to rain. Then it started to pour. The water was still coming down in buckets when he and his sister boarded the school bus. His heart sank as he plopped into his seat. He had a rain slicker and umbrella, so only his shoes and the cuffs of his trousers were wet. Soaked, he thought glumly. No way the sheriff's office would, to be fair, could send anyone out to gather blood that would no longer be there. This wasn't some TV program where crime scene techs would bring out a mobile lab and have the mystery solved in less than an hour. He was right. His mother sent him a text to tell him that Deputy Briscoe would call to cancel, and they'd try again when the rain let up, likely tomorrow afternoon. All that day he was distracted. He barely spoke with any of his friends, just brooded in corners during breaks, all the while trying to puzzle out who the victim could have been and what exactly had killed him. He had no answers. There had once been black bears in the area, but no one had seen one for years. Cougars were back, but they just weren't all that big and still very rare. Maybe a booger of some kind. His dad had told him that those were just stories, but he shouldn't disrespect people who thought they'd seen such things. A mixed message. What had he actually known? One party was unwilling to let him sulk. His best friend, Will. Will's dad, Billy, had been Travis Sr.'s best friend since childhood and had perished along with Travis Sr. The men had hung out together, so naturally, so did TJ and Will. Will was a year younger than TJ, who was the old man of their group, along with Cassie's best friend Natalie, who had a definite crush on TJ. They were normally a tight-knit group. TJ was annoyed when the trio joined him at the lunch table. Will started in first. So, no idea who the body was? TJ looked up, not at Will but at Cassie, and glowered. You know you weren't supposed to say anything. It could mess up the investigation. Cassie just rolled her eyes. Seriously? 'Cause old Fat Briscoe says? Will and Natalie are best friends. If we can't trust them, who can we trust? TJ pursed his lips and sat back, clearly determined to be stubborn. Natalie placed her hand on his and said softly, Travis? She always called him by his name, which he secretly liked. You know that none of us would tell anybody outside our circle. We want to help, to be there for you. We believe you. Oh, those eyes, like some cartoon Disney princess, TJ thought. He considered for a moment more, and then shrugged. Oh, you'll get it out of me sooner or later. I have no idea. We accounted for everyone at the gathering, so it's either some local or someone passing through or someone who was brought in and killed. Maybe killed and brought in, but there sure was a lot of fresh blood and other stuff. He swallowed the bile that rose at the memory of the odor of... and he shivered. I figured that I'd ask Briscoe or one of the other deputies if anyone was missing. Chances are that he didn't check because he didn't really believe me. He just knows that Sheriff Green will kick his ass if he doesn't do his job in at least a half-assed way. Will sniggered. Yeah, old Briscoe is lazy and dull, but not so stupid as to get caught being lazy and dull. You think it was anyone we know? TJ shrugged. That's the $500,000 question. The other $500,000 is, what exactly happened to that person? They spoke on until lunch was over, and by the end of the day, TJ was actually tired from the stress of thinking about it, trying to solve a puzzle without all the pieces. He went to bed early and had some disturbing dreams. He sat out in the woods again, and his stalker was back. It was dark this time, and all he could see was a large shadow skulking inside the tree line as it paced him. He tried to go faster, but the shadow shape kept pace. He decided to make a stand, so he stopped and turned toward the source of his nightmare. From within the shadows emerged large, gleaming, glowing green eyes. The eyes blazed into his soul, and he shuddered as they grew closer and larger, and as they came upon him, he felt the hot breath of a large creature. And he heard a scream in the distance. It sounded like a woman's scream, like his mother or sister, or Natalie. Yes, it was Natalie with her own big eyes, screaming into the night. And then he was awake and breathing heavily. the nightmare images fading into the warm darkness of his room. And he started, as the scream became reality. He could hear, out in the woods, a woman scream. He scrambled out of bed and into the jeans he'd laid out for school. He slipped on his boots and looked up, startled as his door crashed open. It was Cassie. She held her little .223 rifle. TJ picked up his .308 and set it on the bed. "Did you hear that?" She shook with fear and anxiety. "What the f—" She trailed off when their mother appeared, carrying TJ's old 20 gauge. "I heard that, Cassie. We'll worry about that later. Did you all hear the scream?" TJ rolled his eyes and raised his voice. "If there's anyone else in the house, yes, everybody in the house heard that." The last bit of grumbling was distorted by the T-shirt he pulled up over his head. "Cassie, will you spotlight for me? Mom, I need you to cover me. It sounded like it came from the back of the house, so let's start on the back porch." He snatched his rifle from the bed and checked the load as they trundled downstairs. He opened the door cautiously and shone his small but very bright light out into the darkness toward the woods. Nothing. He stepped out, Cassie closely crowding his heels with one of their father's big handheld spotlights. Once he was in position on the porch and the rest of the team flanked him, Cassie turned on the spotlight and shone it into the trees. Just shadows. "Either of you see anything?" he asked, without taking his eyes off the branches and brush shrouded in the darkness. Cassie spoke first. "No, I think there's someone out there in the woods. And at that, she was interrupted by another scream, this time followed closely by a yowl of some creature in pain, much closer to the house. They stood for a while, but no more sounds burst from the woods. The rain started again, light this time but steady, and they gave up their vigil to try and get some sleep. Something was definitely haunting the woods. Terry Ann ushered her brood inside and sent them back upstairs. Needless to say, firearms would be kept close. It was unlikely that anyone would sleep for a while, if at all. Wahoo shook and cowed as little Luther loomed over him, taking up an inordinate amount of space in his tiny, filthy living room. Little Luther, who was not little at all, stood, fist-balled, and glared at the smaller man. "So you're telling me Sam C. took all of what I gave you to sell over that Broxton party thing?" Wahoo stared for a moment in abject fear, and then stammered out, "Yeah, he took all that was left, along with our blend. He said he'd call you." Little Luther nodded. "Yeah, he freaking called me. Asked for some fresh pills to sell to those Broxton kids. Said he made $150 off pills and it guaranteed $500 sale for Saturday night. And then, nothing. Where the fuck is he? You two assholes party up my stuff?" And at that, he edged just a little bit closer, and the smell of the rotting food between his teeth filled Wahoo's nostrils. Wahoo spread his hands to indicate haplessness, and to be ready to fend off the rain of fists he expected at any moment. "No, we didn't party at all. Sam C. heard about the party over there. Went to sell some favors. Maybe chase a little white-tail deer. I fell asleep waiting for him. He never showed. Then I saw the Laws over there Monday evening. That Broxton kid, TJ, walked around with that fat deputy, Briscoe." Little Luther frowned. "Then what? Why the Laws looking round?" Wahoo tried to crawl up into himself. I don't know. I just watched, but, well, they walked into the woods." Little Luther produced an evil smile. "Well, Wahoo, looks like you and me are going to take a walk in those woods." Little Luther couldn't believe that the two jackholes would have tried to stiff him. They never had before, and he was sure they were too scared to start. Then again, Sam C. had been hinting lately that their homegrown blend made enough that they might not need to sell the pills that Luther supplied. Dangerous thinking on Sam C.'s part. He and Wahoo tramped along the muddy trail that led onto the back part of the Broxton place. They knew that Mom was at work and the kids were in school, so neither worried about anybody seeing them or saying anything if they did. Nobody messed with little Luther King. Yet he still didn't want to draw any unnecessary attention, so he'd parked his car just around the next curve in the road from the Broxtons' driveway. They could easily have walked. Wahoo's trailer was just around the next two curves after that, and on the other side of the road. But little Luther liked to drive. He liked to show off his ride to the locals. Wahoo stumbled along behind him and cursed aloud at every trip and tumble. These were frequent since he hadn't cared for going into the woods since he'd been frightened as a kid. Something about big green eyes that he'd told his parents. They neither cared nor believed him, despite his night terrors and return to bedwetting. Those just got him more thumps from his father. He'd taken his first illicit drugs to be able to sleep. Little Luther was about to turn around and tell him to be quiet when he realized that he hadn't actually heard the fool for the past few moments. He stopped and looked back. No sign of Wahoo. He called out in a low voice, "Wahoo, get your ass over here, fool." No response. Now a little angry, he turned back along the trail he'd just covered. He was going to smack that dumbass around a little, maybe knock some sense into it. Had he paid attention, he might have noticed that Wahoo's tracks in the soft wet ground stopped, and then headed back toward the road. He didn't need to see them, though. He knew that Wahoo had freaked out and fled. In his peripheral vision, he caught a glimpse of a large, dark form. "What the f—" was his fitting, final utterance, as he heard the primal scream and felt the sting of large claws grip his arms and shoulders, and before he could even scream, the fangs that sank into the back of his neck rotated and snapped his neck. He never managed another inhale of breath. Wahoo tripped and stumbled and fumbled his way back along the trail. He couldn't believe what he'd seen. That cat thing. It had sat inside the trees and stared at him. Just stared with those ginormous green eyes. Then licked its chops with a big red tongue. He hadn't even thought about warning little Luther. He'd just bolted like the coward he was. He'd run so fast that he hadn't had time to make his normal noises. He heard the predatory scream, intended to momently freeze prey and make it vulnerable. He ran right past little Luther's parked car and on down the road to his crappy little trailer house. When he arrived, he locked himself in his room, squatted on the floor next to his bed and shook and cried. It had to be a bad trip. He lied, of course. He had been high. He was always high on something. Those pills, that scream. Surely little Luther would arrive soon and beat him to a pulp. But at least he won't eat me, he shivered. Wahoo spent a miserable afternoon in his miserable little hovel. TJ was anxious to get home. Will was coming over, and they were going out on a hunt. There was something stalking the property. Cassie would cover for them if their mother came home early. Not likely, but they'd be ready. As the bus slowed on the last curve in the road before their driveway, he saw a car parked over on the shoulder. Gaudy thing. He'd seen it parked at Wahoo's trailer a few times. Wahoo was a piece of crap druggie who lived down the road. Reasonably harmless, just trashy. His friend and oftentimes roommate Sam C. was a full-fledged turd. Weird place to park, he thought. Never know what dopeheads were thinking. When they made it home, TJ helped Cassie set up supper preparation. She was a good hand with her little rifle, and had her dad's eye for tracking, but keeping Mum unstressed was more important than her pride or her skills. Will rolled up about a half hour after the bus dropped them at their home. He rode his own dead father's four-wheeler, and had a 12-gauge shotgun slung in a long holster on the side of the vehicle. He wore his rubber boots and a floppy hat his dad had left him with the name Billy embroidered on the brim in bright green letters. He treasured the goofy thing because it had belonged to his father, who died alongside his best friend Travis Sr. on Black Cat Ridge down south. He grinned. something else he'd gotten from his father. A little crooked to one side, but sincere. His humour was a good counter to TJ's sometimes taciturn nature. "Ready? Looks like we'll get some more rain before we get back." Will eyed the slate-grey clouds scuddling overhead. "Maybe if we get ahead of it, we can find some tracks." TJ simply nodded and hefted his 308. "Take care, Cassie. Hopefully we'll get done and get back before Mom gets home. If not, we're at the fishing pond, right?" Cassie shook her head. "Nope." TJ looked at her, annoyed. It was a dumb lie, but one they could fade. "What?" She rolled her eyes. "You may need these to be convincing." She reached around the corner inside the house and out of sight of the two boys, who stood in the yard, and brought out a pair of fishing poles, which she held up triumphantly. TJ rolled his eyes, but thanked her. Will's grin widened, and he eagerly thanked her and praised her foresight. TJ rolled his eyes again. They each checked their weapons, and then set off toward the pond, and forest, and the fields out back. The two-legged things didn't smell very good, at least at first. Yet they were starting to grow on him. He was getting old, and tangling with feral hogs or chasing deer had become more of a challenge than he liked. Well, the taste was similar to pork, but the outer skins often stank and were inedible. The big one today had been tasty, and the leftovers were now safely stored in the crook of a tree, deep inside his territory. He'd been taking a nice nap, but in the distance he heard an annoying buzz. One of those things the two-legged creatures rode. The young hunter might return. He didn't feel much like it, but decided to take a stalk around its perimeter. Not hungry, but he was feeling a little angry and protective. Too many two-legs in his territory over the past few days. The boys first looked around the pond and the blood tree. There were still a few rusty patches and streaks on the trunk, and in the crook where TJ had seen the bloody mess resting, and just a little bit of the stench remained in the air. Even the rain couldn't wash away everything at once, yet nature would soon take its toll. Once the weather turned, insects would quickly devour and remove the evidence. Will's eyes grew wide when he saw the bloodstains. He believed TJ, of course, but seeing human blood from a dead body was novel and a bit unsettling for him. It wasn't the blood itself. He'd hunted and worked around livestock long enough to be inured to the mere sight and smell. No, it was the knowledge that this blood had once been liquid and had coursed through the veins of another human being. He felt a few goose pimples arise as TJ picked out a pathway that led toward the back of the property. TJ seethed. The deputies should have been out here as soon as it stopped raining. If he and his friend could slog through the wet woodland, so could they. Of course, it was his family's land, so he didn't mind the hunt. He just wanted to know who the victim had been. Maybe someone with a family, he worried. He couldn't help but think of his own father and Will's. They'd been killed and eaten by wild creatures. Maybe some kid or kids were sitting at home waiting for their parent to return. They needed to find and stop their own threat from the wild. The trees had stopped dripping, but the overcast sky had grown even darker as the boys reached the back fence line. They hadn't really spoken about it, but TJ had taken the lead and had a search pattern in mind. Billy trusted his older friend. He knew just how intelligent TJ was, even if he brooded and grouched at times. The trust between them was as solid as it had been between their fathers. TJ noticed it first. The shadow that paralleled their path. The creature that paced silently along beside their own squelching, noisy steps. It glided from cover to cover, never fully visible, but never fully absent. He looked over his shoulder at Will and said quietly, "You see it? Out to the left." Will nodded and kept up the pace. Both boys considered alternatives. If they stopped, the beast might attack or simply disappear once more. If they ran or quickly changed direction, it might attack, or they might lose sight of it and then it might attack. TJ slowed to walk beside his friend. "Let's just get the guns ready. When I give the signal, we turn and fire at the best target. I know that goes against hunting safety rules, but it's hunting us as much as we're hunting it. Once we fire, we advance together toward the target, like our dads taught us." He intended the last of his statement to hearten the younger Will, and it worked. TJ moved out ahead again, and then obviously clicked off his safety as a signal. Will did the same, and both of them turned in unison and raised their weapons to where the threat had been. It wasn't there. The shadowy figure had disappeared altogether. After a few heart-pounding moments of waiting, each lowered his barrel and they turned toward one another. TJ spoke in his normal tones. "Maybe it knows what guns can do." He didn't finish. A large black and grey streak of fur engulfed them as a thunderous roar sounded and the hunter and prey tumbled across the forest floor, indistinguishable from one another. Will stood motionless for just a moment, and then the panic seized him. He aimed his weapon at the massive cat that was mauling his best friend and fired. The buckshot tore into the flank of the beast, and it screamed in its higher-pitched tone, leapt into the air, and turned on him as he attempted to load his next round in the pump of the shotgun. He instinctively pulled back the firearm as a defensive weapon, taking it from a firearm to a club. He felt himself rise into the air, hovering on his side for a moment, as though he rested on an invisible couch. Then he quickly hit the ground and felt the burning scratches along his lower left leg. The big cat had swatted him as it ran past. He now lay on the forest floor in shock and pain. He heard the sharp bark of TJ's rifle and stayed in place, stayed low as his friend angrily rose and stalked in the wake of the enormous feline, all the while pumping rounds after the monster in a vain attempt to follow his plan and take out the beast. He bled from a tooth mark on his forehead and from several other wounds about his body. He was clearly bruised and battered, but he was also furious. Will was almost afraid of his best friend in that moment, of the boy who'd rescued him from bullies and... oh, crap. At least 2 of the wounds on TJ's side appeared to be from the buckshot. "Oh, God, I shot TJ," he wailed in his mind. Then the pain in his leg truly set in, and he realized that it was more than superficial scratches. TJ picked up his groaning buddy in a firefighter's carry. Will would have to keep hold of his shotgun on his own. TJ would need every ounce of strength just to carry and balance him. He gripped his own rifle, now depleted of ammunition, and therefore nearly useless in both hands, and trudged along the trail at best speed. He kept looking around as best he could in case the big cat returned to finish them. Apparently Will had done some damage with the shotgun, but now that he'd started to calm, and the first rush of adrenaline had started to burn off, he started to feel the effects of his own wounds. Somehow the cat hadn't completely shredded him. He'd gotten his rifle up and between the teeth, and Will had acted pretty quickly. Still, it had hit him hard, and his claws had raked him. He'd need a new rain slicker. Naturally, it started to rain as they reached the pond. Terry Ann was furious with both of them, but worried and terrified at the same time. So much for keeping her stress low, TJ thought. She'd been home when they arrived, TJ exhausted and bleeding, Will bleeding and unable to stand. It had almost been too much for her, but she gathered them up and Cassie helped as she piled into the truck and drove to the small city and its pretty decent university hospital. She'd had to call Will's mother on the way. They met at the emergency room and clung to one another while their sons were patched up. Will had 2 younger siblings, and his mother, Cheryl, was even more frazzled than Terry Ann. They were barely making it. Now he'd gone and had his knee all but destroyed. It would take multiple surgeries to repair it, and she had no idea how they'd pay for it. She sat on a small sofa near Will's bed while her 2 younger children slept, a little head on each of her legs. Terry Ann and Cassie sat on the sofa on the opposite wall, near TJ's bed. The same room for convenience. Among other things, they both need to speak with the state game warden about what had attacked them. Terry Ann rose and let Cassie stretch out on the sofa. She padded across the too-cold room and took a seat in the chair next to Cheryl. They'd been friends along with their husbands and the kids, but they hadn't seen each other as often since the men had been killed. There just wasn't time. Well, they'd gotten insurance funds and GoFundMe money, but with maintaining homes and raising children, things were often tight financially. This latest incident had them both on edge. So they'll think it'll take 4 more surgeries to fix him. Terry Ann spoke softly to avoid disturbing the children. Cheryl simply nodded and held back tears. The boy said it was a big black cat. They decided to take it on like their dads. Terry Ann trailed off in her own attempt to hold back the screams of pain and fear and anger that wanted to burst from her tortured mind and soul. She called a few family members. Now her phone buzzed to alert her to a new text. She rolled her eyes and Cheryl looked at her questioningly. "Uncle Jim says he's on the way and he'll go stand guard at the house." Might as well. These hard-headed Broxton men. TJ watched in horror as once again the luminous green eyes grew to enormous proportions and the giant black beast swatted him back and forth between his paws. The claws that looked like long curved saws that dug into his side with each swat, and with each transit between the paws he spun dizzily. Then the cat rose and swallowed him whole. His view switched to the front porch of his home, and there was Will, seated in a wheelchair, his legs missing, and his face and body scarred and torn. His wounds began to weep blood, and he looked up at TJ accusingly as the weeping turned to torrents. Uncle Jim made a call once he'd packed, loaded his pickup, and gotten underway. "Edwina, this is your father." "Oh, I'm all right, sweetness, but there's been an incident with your cousin. Well, second cousin, Travis Jr., the one they call TJ. Some kind of big cat. Maybe the cryptid type that's haunted the backwoods for centuries. Probably a good idea to send at least an exploratory crew. I don't get around in the woods as well as I used to. The boys claim that they hit it with buckshot. Likely just pissed it off. Sorry, I know you don't like that word, sunshine. Anyway, I'm headed that way. Kick it around and please let me know. Love you too, Blossom." He drove on into the darkness, anxious to get to the old homestead and protect his kin. "So you knew that there could be a predator out in those woods, and you didn't tell anyone? Just made patrol notes?" Sheriff Troy Green hadn't raised his voice, but Deputy Briscoe knew that he was in for it. If he lied and got caught, he'd be fired immediately. If he told the truth, well, he'd take a hit, likely a suspension without pay. "Well, sir, I didn't really believe the kid. There was some blood in the tree, but I thought he was probably just imagining things, and it was just some animal. There was no sign of a body. Then it rained, and, well, after that, I just forgot. There were no more reports, and I didn't think the tech could get much after the rain, and so, He trailed off weakly, fitting since the response was weak. The sheriff sighed. TJ emailed me the photos he took with his phone. Barney Fife could have seen he was telling the truth. We'll deal with it after the crisis is resolved. We need all hands on deck for the moment, even yours. First thing is to secure the area around the attack. And we need to notify all the residents in the area to be on the lookout for a large predator, possibly an escaped big cat. We already have people working on finding out whether anyone's missing such a beast, and we have some experts from Parks and Wildlife on the way. I truly don't have time for this, Briscoe. You have no idea how thin your ice is. Now, get with Sergeant Norris. He's on the notification detail. Look alert and concerned when you tell people about this. They need to take it seriously. TJ was young enough to cry openly and sincerely. Will, I'm so sorry. I got you into this. It's so bad. I don't know what to do. You are a hero, though. You saved my life. Will looked up, bleary-eyed, with pain medication and other fluids being pumped into his body. Yeah, but I shot you too. TJ suppressed the absurd laughter that rose through his tears. Only a couple of pellets, and those were outside the ribs. Yeah, it hurts, but they'll make cool scars along with the claw marks. You mainly hit that son of a bitch. He leaned close and whispered. Now, it's my turn. I'm pretty sure I missed with the rifle, but I was too shaken and pissed to shoot straight. They won't let me join the hunt, but they can't stop me from following it. He rose and winked at his friend. Please get better, and I'll make sure to do some overtime when I get a job, to help your mom. Will managed one of his famous grins and shook his friend's hand. You know, you saved me right back. I couldn't have made it out on my own. Take care of it. Take care, TJ. Uncle Jim stood from the rocking chair on the front porch and set aside his shotgun as the pickup came to a stop. Cassie leapt out of the passenger side and looked back and forth, confused. She wanted to run to her great uncle, but she needed to help TJ. She settled for, "Hi, Uncle Jim. Thanks for coming." In the end, TJ helped himself. He moved a little gingerly, but he was young and athletic, so he managed and waved for Cassie to go. Terry Ann lingered to see that TJ made it, but had already learned that he wanted to get by on his own and not have his mother hovering over him. Just like his father, she thought, as fresh tears threatened to well up and trickle down her cheek. Tears of love and pride. She watched as the young man climbed the stairs and greeted his great uncle with a handshake and a man hug. She winced along with him, though Uncle Jim was clearly careful to avoid the bandages as much as possible. "I told you young'uns to holler if you needed anything," the old man admonished the youngsters. TJ smiled a little. "Well, I hollered when that big booger cat hit me." And Cassie assured the septuagenarian, "I would have called Uncle Jim, but in the rush, I left my phone here at the house." With that, she registered a horrified face. She hadn't been able to chat with her friends, with Natalie. She ran into the house without another word. "You two sit here and visit. I'll get supper started," Terry Ann told well, she had to think it sooner or later about her boy. No, the man. TJ, don't stretch the truth. Cool wounds and scars tell their own tale. With that, she entered their home, glad to have a task in mind to keep her busy and to avoid her rushing thoughts. TJ took the porch swing while Uncle Jim resumed his seat in the old rocking chair. "So, you've met Green Eyes?" Uncle Jim half asked, half stated. TJ nodded. "I didn't know it had a name. So you already knew about that thing. You didn't think it might be important to warn us?" Uncle Jim shrugged. "Nothing to warn about. You likely met a descendant of old Green Eyes. New Green Eyes, if you will. We killed the other one, your grandpa and me. First real predator I ever faced. Wasn't the last. My point is, no one has seen one around here since we killed that one over 50 years ago. It took to eating cattle, and Pa was afraid it would take to eating young'uns." TJ relaxed. "I'm sorry, Uncle Jim. I didn't mean to snap. It's just..." Jim nodded in return. "It's tough, TJ. You went up against a big cat and fought it to a draw. Your friend's hurt and you blame yourself. Rightfully so, at least in part. Caused plenty of problems for others as well. With that and, well, with losing your dad last year, being worried about finding work, it's a lot to ask for someone your age, at least these days. Plus, I'm sure the pain is a little distracting. Hey, anything new on Will? What's his prognosis?" He altered the subject to give the kid at least a little break. Oh, he's going to need multiple surgeries, and even after that, he'll have a limp for the rest of his life. I don't know how his mom's going to be able to pay for it. Her insurance is crappy, so's her job. Oh, there are 3 kids. I'm going to give her at least half my paycheck. The other half has to go to Mom. I'll just put school on hold. He paused. Yeah, that should be the last thing on my mind. But there are all sorts of thoughts, ideas and plans running around in your brain at the moment, Uncle Jim said with understanding. Never know what thoughts will intrude under stress. He looked up as an official-looking SUV approached. It took him a while to get started, but here comes the warning. The experts will be here shortly, then the hunting party. Won't that be fun? TJ had never asked what Uncle Jim had done for a living. The stories were variant and myriad among the family. He thought it must have been something interesting, since he was exactly right on the list and order of official visitations. The young one issued a low, triumphant growl and partially closed his eyes in satisfaction. The old beast was dead. The one that had beaten him in his territorial challenge last year. He lay there, frozen with rigor mortis. The young hunters had indeed found their marks, yet the old one managed to make it to his favorite sleeping tree, at least to the foot of it. The younger animal cast about, but didn't like this place. It smelled too much of the 2 legs, creatures in which he'd had no interest, unless they came his way for a fight. He'd fleshed out in the past year and had come here looking to make a new challenge. The old one had made it easy. Wahoo was hungry, almost as bad as when he'd been a kid and under punishment. He was long out of the other drugs, so he'd spot the last of the special blend on hand. Now he had serious munchies, yet he was afraid to go outside. There'd been some stale crackers in one of the cabinets. Nothing in the fridge but some beer and rancid butter. He was miserable and worried for Sam C. He was glad that little Luther hadn't returned. Asshole. Hope that green-eyed monster with the red tongue got him, he thought, resentfully. He hadn't eaten enough to crap his pants, but he expelled gas in a loud fart when there was a sudden pounding at his door. Oh, shit. Little Luther's back. Oh, he's pissed. He's gonna... These things raced through his mind until it registered what his visitor was actually saying. Sheriff's office. Deputy Briscoe. Come on, Wahoo. Sam C. One of you must be here. Wahoo made his way to his feet and stumbled over to the door. He opened it a crack and peeked out into the bright midday light. Hey, officer. Can I help you, man? He sputtered out in confusion and redoubled fear. Fat Briscoe, as the locals called him, stood at the crack of the open door. Oh, don't worry, you ain't in no trouble. There's an animal attack just down the road. We're letting everyone know to stay inside until we can catch or kill the thing. Wahoo considered what he'd heard. His thoughts moved at high pace, so the deputy was almost to his car before Wahoo was able to come to a conclusion. Oh, the jail had food. He stepped out and waved at the deputies retreating back. Officer, deputy. Briscoe barely heard the tremulous voice behind him, but he had to turn to get back into his car, so he saw Wahoo out in the yard, vaguely waving and saying something. What is it, Wahoo? Wahoo stopped, unsure what to say. He desperately wanted the deputy to take him to jail. That was over 30 miles from here. Maybe he'd be safe from those glowing green eyes. It's like Sam C. and another guy, Luther. Yeah, they went into the woods over that Broxton place. And I haven't seen him since. Sheriff Green, Sergeant Norris, and 2 officials from the Parks and Wildlife Department crowded onto the porch to hear TJ tell his story firsthand. Uncle Jim remained, still seated firmly in his rocking chair. Let the youngsters do the standing. he cackled to himself. Sheriff Green spoke to TJ. "Mr. Broxton, looks like you and your friend Will barely escaped alive. Would you be up to showing us where you found the body and where you were attacked? We'll have a strong, well-armed party to protect you and our tracker and his dogs." At this, he indicated a man who stood over by a pickup with a trio of leashed hounds. "Yeah, dogs will be on hand to find the animal that attacked you." "You're absolutely certain what you saw?" TJ nodded. "Yes, sir. It was a cat, no doubt. It had to be around 9 feet long. Oh, sure felt like it. Thing weighed a ton." At this, he grasped his ribs. "Are you sure you'll be able to do this?" the sheriff asked, doubtfully. TJ nodded again. "Yes, sir. Look, Will's laid up in the hospital because I took him out into the woods. I owe him my life, and I'm just sore. The ribs are bruised and, well, yeah, cracked, but not really broken. Everything else is bandaged tight. I really need to help with this. To tell the truth, I plan on going back out behind your group no matter what you said. I want to take down that killer. I have a family to protect and revenge to get. I know it's not personal with animals, but Will is unlikely to walk right for the rest of his life. He'll always have some pain. I don't know why this thing came to us, but I want to help put a stop to it." Sheriff Green offered him a tight smile. "Good enough. We'll be moving slowly at first anyway, and from what you've told us, it's not too far. By the way, you can take that big knife from your belt, but no rifle this time. The rest of the party will take care of that." The game warden and the large animal removal specialist had remained relatively silent, but the expert now spoke his piece. "This may be an old cat, one that can't hunt anymore. Could be escaped and not afraid of humans. No zoos or listed shelters have reported a missing black Panthera genus, but sometimes private owners lose interest in them as pets or lose control and don't report it. Too many illegal owners." They wrapped up the planning session and took off towards the pond. Cassie sat on the front porch with Uncle Jim, each with a firearm across the knees, ready to guard the homestead. Jim was proud of the young'uns. Travis Sr. and Terry Ann had raised them well. TJ pointed out the blood tree, and the tracker took his hounds around it. They took off down a game trail, and shortly, inside of a stand of brush, they found some shreds of clothing and a gnawed human skull. The sheriff approached the pile, the expert in tow. The fussy man squatted near the corpse and examined it closely, despite the odor. "Definitely Panthera, but I've never seen anything quite like it. Looks like a panther or jaguar on the first examination, but the radius indicates something larger, like a tiger." Sheriff Green squatted next to him and reached for a section of the pants. It included a back pocket and, miraculously, a wallet. An even greater miracle, the wallet contained an ID card. The sheriff stood quickly and used his phone to call the dispatch center. After greeting the dispatcher, he asked, "Have there been any new missing persons reports today?" The lead dispatcher took over the call. "Funny you should ask, boss. I was about to call you with this one. Deputy Briscoe called about a young man from a location just down the road from where you are, a little over half a mile. Wahoo reported this from his friend, Sam Clinton, a.k.a. Sam C., and a man named Luther King. Both are missing. I can preliminarily confirm that we found one of them. There's an old school ID with the name Samuel Clinton. Now, keep that under wraps until we confirm and notify next of kin. If Briscoe's on hand, please have him report to the Broxton residence and wait for us." The sheriff wrapped up the call, and the tracker led off with the dogs once more. TJ had pointed toward where he and Will had been attacked. The tracker wanted the dogs to try and pick up the scent of their own. If the cat was still up and moving, they'd find it. Worst case, there'd still be plenty of scent trace left at the scene of the attack, maybe even a blood trail. Before the party got moving again, A shot rang out from within the group and everyone jumped and readied their various weapons. Each hunter looked around quickly to discover the source of the gunfire. Sergeant Norris raised her face, then quickly looked towards Sheriff Green. That was me. She pointed at the ground with the still hot muzzle of her AR. There lay the writhing corpse of a large copperhead. The reptile had been coiled and prepared to strike the large animal expert as he'd knelt to tie his shoe. Sergeant Green nodded. Good shot, Sarge. Now, everybody breathe. In short order, the track had moved out ahead to the attack scene. The hounds didn't need to circle. They immediately picked up on the scent of the killer and bayed in excitement. They led the hunting party, each of whom held a weapon at the ready, to the base of a large hardwood tree. There, stretched out before them, was the carcass of a huge cat, stiff and with its once baleful eyes torn from its head by scavengers. Its tongue protruded from one side of its mouth, and flies swarmed all around it. It was indeed just over 8 feet in length and quite heavy. Some of the hairs around its muzzle had gone white. The expert advised, "It was definitely an old cat. Definitely Panthera genus, but otherwise unfamiliar." He placed a rag from his pocket over his mouth and nose and bent to look more closely. He looked up at TJ. "Well, young man, looks like the animal was hit in the ribs with shotgun pellets, but at least one large caliber rifle round entered its torso." He pointed. "Here, that was the kill shot. Not immediate, but it likely didn't suffer for long." Sergeant Norris's keen eyes had spotted more human remains in the main fork of the tree. TJ was soon free to return home for some much-needed rest, while the others remained and processed the scene. The tracker was no longer needed, so he and the hounds escorted the young man home. When they arrived, Fat Briscoe was seated on the porch in a folding chair and talking with Uncle Jim. A scraggly figure sat in another folder next to him and chewed hungrily on the last few bites of a sandwich. 2 girls sat in the porch swing. His sister, gun across her knees, and Natalie, Disney princess, eyes glowing with admiration. TJ awakened from a troubled sleep. He'd taken some pills for the pain in his ribs and had fallen asleep on the couch in the living room. His sister had been sprawled back on the same piece of furniture, down near his feet. Her head was now forward, and her eyes were open and alert. Natalie had been curled up on the recliner, and now sat up and looked around in confusion with a hint of fear. They heard voices out on the porch, and then in the distance. They heard again what had awakened them. The call of a big Panthera genus cat on the hunt. And so once again, we reach the end of tonight's podcast. My thanks as always to the authors of those wonderful stories, and to you for taking the time to listen. Now, I'd ask one small favor of you. Wherever you get your podcast from, please write a few nice words and leave a 5-star review, as it really helps the podcast. That's it for this week, but I'll be back again same time, same place, and I do so hope you'll join me once more. Until next time, sweet dreams and bye-bye.